Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled is bass player and composer Charlie Haden and director Ted Weiant. Bassist Charlie Haden, whose music you hear right now, was born in Shenandoah, Iowa. This is hard to believe, but by the time he was 2 years old, he was with his family's country western group on the radio. Now, some 50 years later, he's an international award winner, just receiving the 13th consecutive Downbeat Award as #1 bassist. Charlie, tell us how a 2-year-old got to Hollywood.
My parents were both on the Grand Ole Opry before my brothers and sisters and I were born. And as each one of us were born, we were added to the family band. And I was added to the family band when I was 2, singing and yodeling. And I did that every day of my life until I was 15 years old. We had 2 radio shows every day from the time I was 2 until I was 15.
That is so amazing. Yeah. You wonder how you get into the family business.
Right. I really had no choice. I was surrounded by music. I heard beautiful harmonies every day, you know, growing up. I think it was really great for me, and I'll never, you know, I mean, I'll always cherish that experience as being part of my musical upbringing and training.
Were you singing?
I was singing, only singing, singing all the harmony parts.
When did you start taking lessons on any kind of an instrument?
I didn't really start taking lessons. I'm self-taught, and I listened to jazz, you know, as I was growing up, and really fell in love with it. The sounds, I didn't really know what improvisation meant, but I just loved the way it sounded. And started playing on my older brother's bass, because he played bass on our radio show, and when he would leave, I'd sneak in and get his bass and play with jazz records, you know, and that's the way I learned. And then I turned down a scholarship to Oberlin Conservatory in Ohio to go to Westlake College of Modern Music in LA. This was like 1956 after graduating from high school the year before. And
so you came out alone to Los Angeles to go to school.
I jumped on a Greyhound bus with my bass and my suitcase, came to LA and fell in love with LA and started the school, but actually started meeting great musicians who were my heroes, and started playing with them very quickly.
Well, jumping on a bus with a bass is not so easy. I always look at that instrument and I think, why do people choose this instrument? It's so big, you can't stick it under your arm and go someplace with it.
It's definitely an occupational hazard.
But it didn't seem to bother you.
It doesn't bother me because it's the most beautiful instrument in the world, and the bass I have now is the most beautiful instrument in the world.
Are there basses in the category of, say, Stradivarius with violins? How do you know about that?
Well, they're all different makers. There's the Italian makers, there's the French makers, there's the German makers, and the British makers, and then there's the American makers. But I'm very fortunate to have a beautiful French instrument. And
what, is it old?
Very old, 150 years old.
So it goes back the same way as violins or cellos.
That's right.
Did they pluck them at that time, or did they just
bowed
use
them
a
and
bow?
plucked them depending on the composer and the music, you know. There's pizzicato and there's arco for the bowing.
Do you do both?
I do both, mostly pizzicato.
When the makers were making those things, have they continued? Have they passed on that craft to nowadays?
They have, people? But you know, Joan, it takes a long time for an instrument, a stringed instrument, especially to age and to develop a rich sound. And the secret of the fine instruments was the varnish, and the Italians had that secret varnish that made them sound unbelievable, and the French also. And so You have very good makers now all over the world, you know, in Germany and France and Italy and here in the United States, but you have to wait till the instruments get a little older before they start sounding really good, you know.
So their business must be very slow.
I suppose they have patience and they have fans.
And I think they have to have patience. You have to have patience when you're dealing with the bass.
That's right.
I think when you said that people love it because of the sound and they fall in love with it.
I fell in love with it because it made everything sound more full and deeper, you know, and when you take the bass out of music, the depth goes away, really, for me, the sound of the depth, you know.
That's very interesting, and I think you express it very, very well. Obviously, you've taught classes with the bass and about the bass.
I started the jazz studies at California Institute of the Arts here in L.A. in Valencia.
In Valencia, yeah.
In 1982, and now it's grown into a magnificent jazz studies program. I'm very proud of it.
How do you bring in visiting players, or how does the program work?
We have, you know, my special class that I have on discovering your voice and your soul on your instrument and your sound, and then we have composing, we have keyboard theory, we have all the instruments, teaching all the instruments and arranging, and I bring in visiting artists, and David Roitstein, who's the director of the program, brings in visiting artists from all over the world, and we've had Branford Marsalis there, we've had Joe Henderson there, we've had Kenny Kirkland there, we've had Pat Metheny, many, many great musicians coming.
Well, it's great that you're in a teaching position, and earlier in the show you said you were self-taught.
Right. I was self-taught and kind of taught myself on my own how to read music, and you know, composing came natural because of singing, you know, all my life as a kid, and making up songs. And
were you just composing for your instrument, or were you composing for other people?
I started composing seriously when I made my first recording as a leader. It was called Liberation Music Orchestra, and it was on Impulse Records, and it was in 1968. And I composed the music for this record, and Carla Bley did the arrangements. And right after that, I received a Guggenheim Fellowship in composition. Oh. And but I've just, you know, taught myself as I go along, and it's a very painstaking process.
Well, you have a large family. Have they taught themselves, or have you taught them?
They're all self-taught. They've been. I have a son, Josh, 26, and triplet daughters, Rachel, Petra, and Tanya, and they're 22, and they're all extremely talented musically and creatively. And Josh is a writer and musician and bass player and singer, and he has a band called Spain. And two of my daughters, Rachel and Petra, are in a band called That Dog, and their first record was just released on Geffen. And they're in the studio now doing their second album. But you didn't teach them, or did they pick it up from you? I encouraged them, you know, whenever they played. Petra plays violin, Rachel plays electric bass and keyboards. Whenever they played, I encouraged them, and I sat with them while they practiced sometimes, and always was very encouraging, but I didn't want to lead them into something they didn't want to do. I really, you know, made a special point of that, and I'm glad I did, and they're doing what they want to do because they just love it. You know.
Did they take lessons from other people?
They actually, Petra studied violin extensively as she was growing up, and now she stopped, and she's going to go back to it, and Rachel's going to start studying electric bass.
Is your, what's electric bass? Bass guitar?
Electric bass guitar, right. And my other daughter, Tanya, who's majoring in animation in San Francisco State College, plays cello on two of the tracks of Rachel and Petra's record.
I have twin daughters. You did me better by having triplets.
Are they identical?
They're identical.
Wow, mine are fraternal.
So, are they all different sizes?
No, they're all very similar. They don't look alike, but they, just like sisters would look alike.
Well, my daughters look exactly alike.
That's
and
great.
About a few months ago, Jennifer, who writes music, fell in love with the stand-up bass, we call it. Now, you gave it a different name today.
Acoustic bass. It has all different kinds of names: bass violin, bass viol, contrabajo.
I see.
In Spanish.
I see, but she absolutely adores it, and is just carting this huge instrument around with her. And as you say, she just fell in love, and she's arranged for her own lessons and she practices all the time. And
That's great. I mean, if you fall in love with this instrument, you don't mind carrying it around. And I have a wheel for mine for the airports. It goes on a seat in the airplane next to me. I strap it in with the seat belts.
And there you go.
And there you go.
You talked about bringing all these wonderful people into your program, but you've also played with great people like Ornette Coleman,
Right.
and Bruce Hornsby before him, I guess,
Yeah.
and John Coltrane.
Right.
How and what capacity did these people come into your life?
Well, I started recording after I arrived in L.A. With Paul Bley. I made my first album, and then started recording with Ornette Coleman, and we all went to New York and opened at the Five Spot Cafe in 1959 and turned jazz around with the innovative new direction that Ornette and the band was doing. And since then, you know, I've recorded with so many people, I don't think I could count how many albums, but many people, many albums as a leader, many albums as a sideman, where musicians or composers want me to play on their record.
I see. I have a very, very short clip of you performing, and I want our audience to just see you because I think it looks so beautiful. The lighting and the whole thing is so great.
From The Tonight Show?
I think it was, yes, a performance with you, and who else?
Quartet West, Ernie Watts, Alan Broadbent on piano, Ernie Watts on saxophone, and Lawrence Marable on drums.
Perfect. Let's see that. I think that is so fabulous. Tell me a little bit about the forming of Quartet West.
Quartet West was formed after my wife Ruth, you know, insisted that after moving back to L.A. from New York that I have some musicians in L.A. to perform with, because I do a lot of my performing in New York City and Europe. And we found Ernie Watts and Alan Broadbent, and the first drummer with us was Billy Higgins, who lives here also.
Sure.
And Billy was involved with Cedar Walton at the time, and he couldn't make all the gigs, so I was very lucky that Lawrence Marable was here, who's played with Charlie Parker and Bud Powell, and I played with him, you know, when I was 19 years old, when I was in L.A. before. And this group is very, very special. All these musicians are wonderful improvisers, masters, and they're committed to beautiful values, beautiful music, bringing, you know, romance and beauty. And
You talk about romance and beauty, and I think this album takes in that moody 40s,
Yeah.
the architecture, the Humphrey Bogart kind of genre.
it was a very special time in this city that we're in now, L.A., because of the film industry especially, and everything that surrounded that culturally, the composers, the writers, the directors, the actors. You know, they had great composers, Max Steiner, Hugo Friedhofer, Dmitri Tiomkin, Franz Waxman, all my favorite composers.
Those were all people in the movies, right?
Oh, yeah. And the architecture, the Art Deco, you know, Raymond Chandler described L.A. better than anybody else about L.A. in his detective novels with Philip Marlowe. And then, you know, I just wanted people also to know about this period of time in L.A. and also be able to kind of tap into their ability to have fantasies and dream. You know, we're surrounded so much with violence and madness in the world. I think people are ready for romance.
I think you're right, and I think you brought a wonderful message to us today, and we thank you so much for being with us, Charlie Haden, and come back again with something new, and come back with your family.
Great, fantastic.
Love to do that. Do we have it?
Yeah.
We have it. Yeah, we have it. And don't go away. Well, he's showing you this. I'll show it to you. Well, I'm showing this to you.
Always say
We'll
goodbye.
be right back with director Ted Weiant. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and we're back with director Ted Weiant. His credits cover television, Broadway, off-Broadway, radio, and the Los Angeles Theater. We'll talk about all of his work and all of his awards. There were 5 drama-logues for his Merton of the Movies revival. Maybe we should start there. Tell us what made that revival so great, Merton of the Movies.
Well, let's see. I did it in New York, and I think what was very interesting about it was the first time that I can recall that drama-logues, Hollywood drama-logues, were given to a New York production. We did it in New York at Equity Library Theater. I reconceived the whole play. It was originally written in 5 acts. I did it in 2 acts. And I did the play as a film inside of a film inside of a film. So the concept of the piece was a 1980s film crew shooting a 1930s film crew shooting a movie. So it was we redesigned the entire theater like a soundstage, and it was pretty extraordinary.
That's probably why Hollywood had to stick their nose in and give you a drama-logue, 5 drama-logues. You also did another revival of The Miracle Worker. And you got a New Jersey Critics Award.
Oh, absolutely. That was pretty astounding, that production.
Drama Desk nomination.
Drama Desk nomination.
Tell us
it
about
almost
that.
moved to Broadway. There was another production coming through, so we didn't get that opportunity. But it really focused on the dysfunctional family. Everybody knew going to see Miracle Worker that there was a miracle involved here. And so my tack on the piece was really to focus on the family. And the question here, dramatic question here was, when will Annie get fired? And what will keep this family together? And so, in fact, the focus was all off the child completely. So when the child did say wah wah at the end, it was astounding to those, even though they knew the story. That's not what the focus of the piece had been.
Is that what the director does? I never think about the director looking for a hook or a different focus or a restaging.
I think you have to have a reason to do a play. Plays require a great deal of love, a great deal of courage, a great deal of time, and a great deal of insight. And to just do a play for play's sake is not always the healthiest or happiest experience.
I don't think we ever really think about that. I always think of a director comes in and says, here's what was given to me, here's what was written.
Oh, afraid not. No, you know, you're not the only one. I think there are very few people that really understand what a director does. I'm doing Charlemagne right now, and that was an extraordinary journey for me.
Charlemagne was written by Sarah Miles. It was her first piece. Mm-hmm. And here you came in directing a play by a woman, an English woman besides. Did that bother you?
Not at all. Actually, I had been wanting to work at the Fountain Theater for quite some time. The Fountain is a waiver theater here in Los Angeles. They do very creative, very exciting work, as opposed to a lot of theaters here in town that do, I call it, agenda work, and that is that everybody's doing the play to be seen, to get a career going someplace else. And here at the Fountain, we really have an opportunity to focus on the art and the work. So it was very exciting for me to be involved in that. And if I'm going to do a play, that's the way I would like to do it, is really focus on the work.
I know. I saw the play, and I saw you and Sarah Miles sitting in the back row together, and she would turn to you and say something, or you would turn to her. It seemed like a collaboration, which I thought was wonderful.
Wonderful collaboration. I love working with writers and new writers, but I love working with writers, and it's not always a collaboration. Sometimes it can be a very, very difficult and dangerous journey. I have been known to throw writers out of rehearsal, and really they have to be prepared to go on the journey with the actors, with the director, and oftentimes they're very, very frightened of being exposed, whatever. So you have to be very, very careful. But with Sarah, it was a magnificent journey.
But that's what I've heard. I've always heard that the writer writes it, and then they just never are heard from again.
Well,
somebody else takes over and does it. So
I don't prefer working that way. In fact, whenever possible, I love the writer with me at all times, because again, it is a collaboration. They're seeing the play through my eyes, and I must see the play through their eyes. I think early on in my career, I think I may have imposed my will on plays, and I don't do that anymore.
You know, is that right? Well, no. I think you're looking for like a imprimatur, right? I mean, you're looking for a thumbprint that says maybe Ted Weiant.
Well, I think I have that. I think there is a quality.
Naturally.
There's a quality in my work. I think you have to look at the quality of the acting. You also have to look at the feeling that you come away from the play. You know that you've been someplace where you've never been before. I like to think of myself really more as a storyteller, and create a whole world and an environment and a very safe place where the audience feels very comfortable to take this journey. Certainly with Charlemagne, it was very interesting because when I read the play, it was filled with mixed emotions. It's a tormented play. It could be perceived as a play about betrayal. A wife discovers that her husband's a transvestite, and I think in most normal situations, a woman may throw the husband out of the house and seek a divorce, and that's not what happens here. She encourages him to explore his transvestism, and then when he discovers he's a transsexual, I think that would ruin a relationship, and that's not what happens in this play. But the pain in being that honest with oneself and listening to a partner tell you this information about themselves could be very disruptive in a relationship.
I think it could be. I think so, but I also think the way it was written seems to just exude a kind of a love. There's a love there. And I don't know, I mean, it's the director
Sarah.
Probably and the writer.
I think that's Sarah, but it was very interesting in the rehearsal process. We had to work through the layers of betrayal and pain and torment and guilt. And there were often times when my cast would stop and burst into tears and would need to be consoled after a scene because of the nature of the questions being asked in the scene. And so, I'm not a therapist, but I play one on TV. We had to really work through that and come up with the story that we came up with. And with Sarah present, it was a joy.
So she gave you the extra little maybe insight that you needed. Quickly, before we go on to Love Letters, because I'm dying to talk about Love Letters, which was, I think, phenomenal what you did here in Los Angeles and all over the country. Where were you born? Where did you go to school? And how'd you get here?
Hartford, Connecticut. I grew up in a big theatrical town. There were, I think at that point, there must have been 22 theaters within a 15-mile radius of Hartford. So I think from the time I was I started acting when I was 14, but I had an opportunity to do a lot of theater. So by the time I got to college, I'd been in over 100 productions. And it's really sad because I don't think that exists anymore. And I'm not talking too many, a couple of years back. But I don't think that exists anymore, and I don't think young people have that opportunity anymore. But I was very blessed by having that opportunity.
Then what school did you go to?
University of Connecticut.
Oh, you were right there.
I was just a Connecticut kid, yep.
Really?
Right there.
And you still look like one with your little sweater and your little...
when you direct a lot of Protestant plays, you end up looking pretty Protestant.
Perfect, perfect. Now let's get into Love Letters. You directed 120 couples?
Oh, at least. I'm sure there's more. Just here. My wife and I moved here in 1990 specifically to do Love Letters. And we weren't sure if it would be embraced or not. It had been a moderate success in New York, but not a profound success.
Did you have anything to do with it in New York?
No, we've just known Pete Gurney for many, many years. My wife is Joan Stein. She produced The Middle Ages.
She produced some things in Los Angeles as well.
Absolutely.
Forever Plaid.
Forever Plaid, Ruthless, and also Love Letters. So.
Oh, she produced the Love Letters. Oh, I didn't realize that.
So we
She's
came here.
Terrific.
We came here on a wing and a prayer, and we thought it would be successful. We didn't realize it would end up having over a 2-year run with a different cast every single week. And in fact, it was our production that then made Love Letters the true international success that it's become. So we're very, very proud of
it. It has played in London. Every little city I went to, I would always see, not in Europe, but in America, I would see a marquee that had Love Letters on it. And obviously it was your interest in it and the way you directed it. Now, I have some photographs. I think the marvelous thing is you're doing a book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that all came about in an odd and wonderful way. Being a director, you take notes, and you take notes on the performance, and you work with the actors. And very early on, I discovered that Love Letters was going to be not what I thought it was going to be. It seemed it could have been a glorified stage manager's job, just putting actors in.
That's what I would think.
And I discovered very early on that I never gave the same note twice, that every week on a weekly basis, whatever cast was performing, they brought their own peculiar twist and turn to the piece. Prior to our doing it here, mostly in New York, they were done mostly by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, very typical
Gurney characters.
And here we had an opportunity to involve and invite a lot of wonderful actors who might not have ever had an opportunity to do the play.
Let's start here. Who is this?
That's Corbin, Bernsen, and Sharon Stone.
Very sexy.
Very sexy and quite wonderful there. Andy and Melissa were tragic characters. They were in love with the image of themselves, and they brought an incredible poignancy to this love story that was never achieved again. There was a very tragic
I'm going to go quickly
tale.
so that we
Charlton
can get
Heston
through
and
to
Gene
them.
Simmons. That was the first time Chuck did the play for me, and the first time that I had worked with Gene. The evolution of Charlton Heston in the playing of the role, he's done it with Alexis Smith, he's done it with Carol Burnett, and his evolution of Andy Ladd has been quite extraordinary. So what I've done here actually is taken all of my director's notes and compiled a book following the journey of the actors and what truths they were all able to uncover during the course of the week. There's a wonderful couple, Joe McCraney and Delta Burke. Leslie Nielsen and Carol Burnett.
Did you cast these people?
No, Stephen Furtick did, and along with Joan, my wife, and we had an exceptional time.
So here we got to a different...
This was very interesting. Our first black couple doing the play were Paul Winfield and Diane Carroll. And shortly afterwards, we asked Blair and Alfred to do the play, and the particular spin they brought to the play, I shall never forget. In fact, they gave perhaps the most astounding reading of the play in the fact that they took it on a journey that it had never been.
Do you go right along on the journey with them?
Oh, I have to. I have to stay out of its way. I give them an idea of the landscape of the play. I give them an idea of the emotional territory of the play, and then I set them free.
And this is?
Ben Gazzara and Jenna Rollins, magnificent. And lovely, lovely Lee Remick. This was the last play that Lee performed in.
When you say you gave different kinds of notes, like what's a note to somebody? Or what's something that you would write in your book? Is that what it is?
Pretty much so. I think most of the actors came to the play thinking, it's not your typical play. It's a play about scenes we never see. And an actor is trained really to do a lot of subtext and play subtext. And there is no subtext in this play. It's only truth. And so the journey was to really get the actors to understand that they had to be in a constant vulnerable position and respond in truth to truth. And so that was very interesting.
I see. And we're responding to truth because we're getting a rap sign.
Okay.
And you know what that means.
I hear you.
Thank you very much, Ted Weiant, for being with us. It was really interesting. And thank you for watching the Joan Quinn Profiles today. Keep writing to us at 520 South Grand, 8th floor, 971, and we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles.